So just to confirm that today we're doing a session, a webinar, a 45-minute webinar on evidencing AML compliance using calQrisk software. Today we're going to look at, we use the term AML throughout, but generally speaking, that will include combating the financing of terrorism and financial sanctions, just for brevity and not having to give the whole explanation 50 million times. We'll generally probably refer to AML. We will be looking at each component of the AML compliance program as such, and we'll try, and the idea is to give you a live demonstration of what the calQrisk software can assist you with in evidencing your AML compliance through your own individual programs. So I think we've got, we've got a good number already logged in, and we'll just give it a second or two and then we'll continue. I should probably just reconfirm for those who've just joined that this session is being recorded, so just so you're aware of that. And there will be a Q&A session at the end as well. Okay, Chris, if you want to just go on to the next slide for me, please. Okay, so all of you would probably be familiar with ourselves. calQrisk is comprised of lots of very well experienced risk and compliance professionals in supporting our customers and clients, which are based in financial services, public sector, not-for-profit, and many other sectors across international boundaries. We're headquartered in Ireland, and as you know, we offer governance, risk and compliance software solutions and services. In terms of today's session, my own name is Sandie, and I'm the head of the Risk Advisory Service at calQrisk. I suppose just a brief introduction, I guess. I've spent 15 years plus working as a risk and compliance professional in financial services. So I'm very familiar with the obligations around AML, CFT and FS, and the importance of giving this topic due attention within your own compliance programs of activities. We have our audience today is multi-jurisdictional, so we've got and also multi-industry. So we're going to be taking this from a general AML, CFT, and FS perspective, and hopefully giving you some ideas for how you can use the software to help you in this particular area. Our CEO, Chris Hanlon, that you see on the screen as well today, has extensive knowledge and experience in delivering software solutions to meet the needs of risk and compliance professionals in this area, both from his years in calQrisk and also from his time working with a large financial service provider in the UK. So today, the intention of how we will deliver this is that I will outline the key compliance requirements at a high level that face AML compliance officers, and Chris will demonstrate the software elements that we hope will help you to provide your evidence and document how you're doing the things that you are doing to meet your compliance obligations. So just to let you circulated afterwards, and there was a Q&A, so please feel free to enter the questions in the Q&A part of Zoom, and we will address them either as they come up or at the end, depending on what the question might be. So to give you an idea, today we're going to have a look at risk identification, analysis, evaluation, and reporting. So basically the elements of the risk register. We'll have a look at STR management. So suspicious transaction reporting is obviously one of the most critical elements of AML compliance and how that can be achieved using calQrisk. We'll have a look at general document management. We'll also look at the requirements and the good risk management practice of having a detailed business-wide risk assessment. We'll then look at control testing and an example of how calQrisk helps various industry sectors meet their regulatory reporting requirements. We'll take one example, but you'll see the methodology behind it in terms of how we help to deliver the regulatory obligations that you as AML compliance officers need to meet on an ongoing basis. Okay. So to summarize from the get-go, what is today's session about? Really, it's about the fundamental point that evidence is key to compliance. It's all about the proof. We know traditionally any regulatory organization will always say if it's not written down, it didn't happen. But the challenge for compliance professionals is that you can be doing all of the right things, but if you can't demonstrate it, then that is fundamentally a major difficulty. And the difference between doing the right things and being able to demonstrate it are very different challenges, and we have to be able to do both. That relies very much on having detailed and accurate records. It is vital that you can prove that what you're saying is being delivered, that the controls you've put in place are working, and so on. In order to achieve that and to be able to be confident of the position you're in, then ongoing maintenance of supporting documents is very important. Of all areas, it is the one that is, the world in which we operate in when it comes to money laundering and the associated activities is changing all the time. So maintaining your supporting documents and having those accessible to the people who need to see them on an ongoing basis is really important. That's tied into the fact that risk ownership of the various tasks and activities around AML, CFT, and FS need to be distributed out to the people who are best positioned to influence them. So therefore, they need to be able to see the guidance that's in place for them, the rules that they need to follow, the procedures they need to follow. When we think about the whole AML, CFT category of risk, summary information for the board is vital, that it's enough to give them what they need to know, to understand and inform their decision-making processes. But while they don't need all the minute detail, that minute detail needs to exist in, your risk management frameworks. And that information comprises a lot of parts, and we're going to look at those parts throughout this session. But key to it is centralizing the documentation of those efforts, making sure that the detail that you rely on is up to date and accurate, and that in itself will facilitate further AML, CFT, and FS analysis, and it will facilitate, and support the audit processes, the 3 lines of defense, all of those good things and good risk management practice that we want to put in place for the AML, CFT, and FS area. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at the AML, CFT, and FS identification, analysis, evaluation, and reporting. And that all comes down to the risk register. This topic of AML in its broad sense covers a huge range of individual risks, and they do need attention at the individual risk level. Risk assessment, once you've assessed them at an initial stage, does not remain static. Risk exposure does not remain static, and this is a very classic example of that. The level of risk that each of you as representatives of your organizations are exposed to is very much impacted by the individual products and services and the range of those products and services that you offer as an entity. The exposure varies enormously depending on the level of customer activity involved in the particular product and how they engage with you as a service provider. Each new product and service that you introduce to your portfolio of products and services needs to trigger an AML, CFT, and FS review, because they do have different characteristics that will need a fresh view, at the very least, of what the organization's exposure might be. So I'm going to hand over to Chris to have a look at how calQrisk will help you with this.
Great, thanks, Sandie. You might confirm you can see my screen okay?
Yes, yep, I can.
Excellent. So for those of you who are kind of regular attendees of our webinars, you'll know that it's very rare that we actually go into the calQrisk solution itself. But over the last couple of weeks and months, post-webinar, we often get asked about, when we cover the good practice and the theory and everything else, we often get asked about how can the solution help. So we decided to do a bit of a hybrid model, as Sandie alluded to, where Sandie has covered the fundamentals of the risk assessments through an AML lens. And right now I'm going to just step through a bit around how calQrisk can actually help you then achieve some of that work as well. So I appreciate not all of you will be familiar with calQrisk who are on the call today. So basically, we're going to spend a bit of time just focusing on the risks module. I can drill down, and Sandie referred to it as the category, or the AML risk category. We do have people on the call from all sorts of different industries, jurisdictions, so some of this may and may not be applicable as we step through the actual solution itself. But if I just come in and drill down into one of the risk assessments available in calQrisk, there are a couple of different ways of actually doing risk assessments, and we'll touch on those as we step through the half an hour, 45-minute webinar. But really what I wanted to do is just pick on one of the out-of-the-box assessments. So in this case, it's about inappropriate STR practices. Rather than me going into the detail of every single field that you can capture or try and capture as part of your program, I'm just going to cover basically the high-level piece around setting my inherent level of risk. So in this case, I have in my dummy organization, I have it set here at a 4x4, and that can link back to my risk criteria or my impact matrix. And then at the very top, I have a very straightforward workflow. I can go in here and click on Analyze, and I can pull up the out-of-the-box questionnaire that's available in calQrisk about my STR practices. So once I move into that step, basically the system will actually then generate or pull up the questionnaire. I, as the risk owner or the end user, can just come down through the questionnaire and say yes, no, don't know. I have the opportunity to be able to leave comments here. You can see these speech bubbles. I can go as far as actually uploading evidence or linking evidence. That might be my STR policy or procedure, screenshots, PDFs, Word docs, whatever it is. So really what you're going to end up doing is having calQrisk as your single source of truth when it comes to evidencing your AML compliance. So let's say we've done that risk assessment, we've answered yes, no, and don't know. The next step then is that the system will do is it'll basically look for any suggestions or automatic suggestions it can find as part of that assessment for a way in which you can reduce your level of risk based on your answers to that questionnaire. In my dummy organization, now the system has suggested 5 or 6 different things. I can tick all the boxes and say they're all relevant, or I can just tick one. And I can click on number 4, or I can just click on the ID number here, whichever one works best for me. And it will move across into the task manager or action manager, basically within calQrisk. The first piece up here is all automatically popped in. So I can have that task automatically populated. I can fill in some additional information out here. So I can give it a due date. In this case, I need this done by the end of October. It's to do with documentation, and Chris is the task owner. Depending on how you like the system configured, I can hit save, and I'll get an automatic email now saying you've been assigned the task coming from calQrisk, or it can say whatever you want. It's basically say have your own branding, your own company details in it. And then everything then is centralized within the system, as I mentioned. So I can come in and say, working on this now. I can hit save. And rather than me chasing people for updates, email reminders, that sort of stuff, I can actually build my full audit trail within the application itself. So you'll see on the 20th of August, I was logged in and I said I was working on this now. Everything in the solution is all tied back where it makes sense. So if I want to do, I could actually come in and click on that link, and it will actually bring me back to the assessment that we were just on a few minutes ago where we started. So kind of just to recap that process just before we step through some reporting, given that the topic of it is all about evidence, or the topic of today's webinar is all about evidence. Basically, we started out by going into our AML risk portfolio. We did a quick risk analysis to identify any potential issues that we might have in our dummy organization. It then gave us some options and ways we can further reduce that level of risk. And we generated one of those into a task and assigned it out to someone else in the organization. We will have a look at a couple of other ways of doing risk assessments in the system, as I mentioned, particularly when we get down into that more detailed business-wide risk assessment. We'll have a look at different ways of capturing the more granular data. But just to very briefly just touch on some of the reports. So when I come over here and click on risk reports, I can come in and run a quick filter and say, actually, do you know what? I'm just interested in running a very basic high-level AML risk register. Literally just choose my filter, select AML, hit standard, and then the system will pull up a risk register for me. This is all automatically populated. I, as the end user, didn't have to type any of this information based on the assessment or the questionnaires I just filled in. The system has popped in the risk, the owner, the scoring, any of the controls, as well as all the recommendations are all popped out here. So as you start to build that process out, you can capture it all on your risk register, and you can, of course, add your own business-specific or firm-specific risks and controls and things like that too. Where most of our clients, though, will get their management information from is usually in dashboards. So Sandie mentioned about that board reporting piece as well. So we're just going to focus on a very high-level dashboard here. You can make your own dashboards, make your own widgets. You can lock them down or open them up to different people within the organization. But I'm just going to literally just demonstrate the fact that this is point and click. So I can go into that heat map. Nobody wants any of the risks in the amber or red area, particularly when it's something as kind of high risk as AML. So yeah, I can go in and click on that, and I can drill down and see the detail behind it. And the very last piece that I'm just going to point out then around the kind of higher level AML assessments is just that we do see a lot of our clients using the solution for particularly for gap analysis where there's new regulatory change. So I know a lot of people at the minute are worried about the AML regulation. For example, you can bring your gap analysis into the solution. You will be able to do it automatically through calQrisk soon as well with the launch of our Horizon scanning feature. But you can bring your gap analysis into the solution and go right down to rule level. So for example, you can see Article 69(1)(a) says this, and I can actually come in and rag rate myself against it, leave a comment and attach evidence as well. So you can do a full gap analysis there. As Sandie mentioned, compliance or evidence is key when you're demonstrating compliance. So I'm going to pass back over to Sandie and we're going to cover the next piece. But as Sandie mentioned, if you do have any questions, do feel free to pop them in. So maybe back over to you, Sandie, I think for STRs.
Okay, and just before I launch into that, I just want to mention there's a question, does the business-wide risk assessment sit separately to the enterprise risk assessment? BWRA is managed by compliance and AML, whilst the ERA is with risk for the strategic, operational, financial risks, etc. If you don't mind, we'll come back to that when we look at the BWRA. I just want to acknowledge that I've seen the question and I'll come back to that. And if I don't answer it properly, somebody nudge me. But we'll come back to that when we talk about the BWRA section, if that's okay. So I suppose one of the key pillars that we think about in terms of evidence, the absolutely business critical element is the suspicious transaction report management. Everybody is fully aware, I'm sure, of the need to monitor and manage the submission of STRs and what happens with them. So when we demonstrate the element in the software, we're going to have a look at how you would manage your register of suspicious transaction reports. The register, as you know, will need a range of data items, including the relevant details about the suspicious transaction, who submitted it, the acknowledgement of the STR, the date it was submitted, result of the AML compliance officer's investigations, the decision of the AML compliance officer as to whether to notify the financial investigation unit in your jurisdiction, which is the Garda Síochána in ROI, but it will be different in each jurisdiction, or the relevant revenue authority. So all of those good things can be managed through your register of suspicious transaction reports. It's also absolutely critical from an evidence perspective for the AML compliance officer to be able to track how you're following through on STRs from the initial acknowledgement just of receipt of it through to the decision making, and then what happens next, and being able to have a centralized reference and a centralized tracking mechanism is critical. From an ongoing compliance and risk management perspective, it's really useful to be able to have a centralized set of records where you can start to begin to see whether there are any negative trends in a worst case scenario, but any kind of trends emerging on the whole STR reporting piece. So you want to be able to track the numbers of STRs, the type, all of that good information is only useful if you're tracking it and managing it, and therefore then subsequently analyzing it, reporting on it, and letting the people who need to know what's happening. And that has to be done through encouraging individual risk ownership. And that's almost partly some of that question that's already been put through, is that ownership of AML can be distributed and should be distributed throughout your organization. There are people that are going to be responsible for different elements of it, and therefore they need to be supported in how they conduct their part of the process. Before I just hand over to Chris to demonstrate this particular aspect of it, I just want to check questions popped in about the STR. For the STR register, I thought not to add the staff who reported. I do have them saved on the original STR, but don't like to add such sensitive data on the register. Do you think this information would be required for the register? No, absolutely. It's up to you how you do this. And there are security arrangements within calQrisk that can die down access to that register if you're so concerned, or if you are concerned about that. But also you could just do it in terms of title if you preferred not to have the name of the actual reporter, because absolutely understand the confidentiality of it. And you certainly, if you were sharing access to it, you would be wanting to restrict access to that information. So it very much depends on who's using it, for what purpose, and who you have allocated access to. I hope that answers that element of the question. So I'll hand you back to Chris to have a look at that area.
Excellent. Just jumping back in. Yeah. So as Sandie mentioned as well with the register, I think we have a very kind of straightforward register template just built. I think one of the things we want to get across is that no matter how many organizations we work with, I don't think we've yet come across an STO register that still has the same columns or data points or whatever it is. So everyone will have a slightly different workflow internally. And back to that person's question around some people love the idea of everyone being involved right from the first line right through to second line and obviously escalations and things like that. Whereas other people maybe have different workflows that could be automated through CRM systems or banking systems and things like that too. So really what I wanted to try and get across here was if you have an STO register in place, there's a fairly good chance it could be replicated within the solution with a bit more rigor. And that's what I'm just going to step through here basically. So what I have is section 1. I probably should have relabeled that as this is where the person logs the initial report. So let's say I'm the person who notices the transaction. I'm on the front line of the business or whatever it is that I'm doing, and I notice a suspicious transaction. In section 1, that person, you can have whatever data points, fields, tick boxes, date fields, multi-selects, and everything else. And only they'll be able to see that when they log in. So they won't be able to see the part for the AML compliance officer or the MLRO to actually go and populate. So we'll have a quick look at that as we step through it. But high-level description of the STR, client reference number, relationship types. You obviously have full control and command over what's in each of these drop downs, amounts. You can capture currency as well, transaction type. The primary contact name, as Sandie mentioned, we have seen people that would just use job functions within the solution or tie it back to individual names as well. That's really down to the internal policy or procedure. And then if you wanted to, not everyone can do this, but within the solution, I can actually open up the STR. So naturally it's locked down only to the person who logged it. And even when they go in, they can only see certain fields. And obviously the MLRO or the relevant person within the organization will be able to go in and see everything on an STR. But if I wanted to share a specific record, I felt the need maybe to escalate it to someone else for whatever reason, I can go in and just select an additional user here as well. So there are different kind of user rights and roles that are super granular within the STR log. So that's the initial piece. Then in section 2, you can have a piece for the investigation, as Sandie alluded to. I appreciate I don't have this too well padded out, but I can capture, maybe go in and see what the customer's risk rating was, their source of funds. Did we ever apply enhanced due diligence? Are they a PEP, for example? A text box would be useful, Sandie, as you said, maybe your justification as to why you escalated to the FIU or maybe why you didn't escalate it as well. And then the audit trail, obviously, as we know, is one of the big things. So we can leave section 3 for additional information. We have some automatic fields here as well, but you do have that comment log that I already mentioned as well. That I already showed as part of the tasks module. I think we had a look at when we were in the risk side of things. Whereas I could come in here and say, maybe not working on this now, but I could say reviewing this today. And then when I hit save, the same process applies. Basically, I, as the MLRO, will be popped in the comments log here. So in one file, I should be able to have almost everything about the STR, the initial report that was received. That person can only see the initial report. And then section 2 and 3 are really down for those confidential data points, Sandie, that you maybe mentioned as well, where you might not even want the initial reporter to be able to see it as well. And then my very last piece, if you like, on the registers then as well, is just to highlight the integration. I'm not going to step back through the tasks module because we already had a look at it on the risk side. The same functionality applies on the STR. If you did want to, you can have tasks that are linked back to the STR. You can assign them to yourself just as reminders as well, if you thought that was useful. And then the documents tab as well can be useful within the solution. You can attach screenshots, again, PDFs, Excels, Word docs, all the mainstream documents can all be attached there. So again, keeping the STR register and all the supporting evidence all in the one location, rather than maybe having it in OneDrive and scattered everywhere else. So that's kind of how straightforward the STR process is in the solution. The other thing I should have just pointed out, sorry, as well, is that when an initial STR does get raised, you can have the solution fire an email out to someone automatically as well to flag that an STR has been raised. So it doesn't just sit in the solution and go nowhere, if that makes sense. So maybe back over to you, Sandie, then.
Okay, cool. So the next piece we're just going to look at is the piece on document management. So as you know, well familiar with and probably too familiar with is the fact that there's a huge range of documentation that's associated with the AML, CFT, and FS function. And one of the challenges can be literally, knowing that all of it's together, accessible to the people who need access to it, and that there's a comprehensive kind of single source of truth, if you like, on it. And so you've got things like your AML CFTFS policy, your due diligence procedures. Deceased account beneficiary due diligence is just an example of a really important one when it comes to this particular area. Procedures for dealing with high risk scenarios, your AML compliance officer piece. I have to say, even as a compliance officer myself, back in the day, I wasn't all that good at documenting my procedures for what I did in respect of this activity. And it's only afterwards you kind of go, all right, okay, that's a key element of it as well. The training content descriptions, I think it is one of the things that we do need to be tracking, because there is an expectation that you have role-specific training as well as general training. And it's really useful to be able to have a record of the high-level content that was delivered in different sessions, and making sure that all that information and documentation is held centrally. That would include, obviously, the training attendance records themselves and any certificates that might be associated with formal training that was completed on the topic. It would include copies of your annual business-wide risk assessments, often referred to in different jurisdictions as firm-wide risk assessments also, but there is an expectation that you have at least an annual completion that's reported to the board, and I would say store a copy of what was submitted to your boards for historical records purposes. Attach relevant audit reports. Again, we do try to apply the 3 lines of defense model to all of the activities, but it's even more important to certain critical areas such as this. And if you have an audit report relating to this area, then I would say make sure that there's a record of it, what their findings were and what the associated tasks and actions were. The topic we often hear in relation to compliance now, and also broader risk management, is the importance of having a scenario analysis activities and documenting the reports around that. So if you do conduct a scenario analysis exercise around this particular area, then make sure that the reports, the findings and the outcomes are all recorded within your systems. So I'll give it over to Chris to show the elements of that.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm going to keep this piece relatively short. So I only have just 2 things to highlight here. Sandie mentioned about training records, training logs, and things like that as well. So where we've seen firms do that really well, I know I'm still on the STR screen, but just basically we've seen firms have their own training registers within the platform. And again, it's typically an Excel spreadsheet or a folder structure that people have on their laptop or OneDrive. The idea being is that you can replicate that within the system. You can have, these are the people who got trained on this day, this was the PowerPoint or doc they went through, and you can have your AML training registers and everything else then all stored within a register within the solution. And then the other big piece then that we see people using is, if I just come down here into, I'm sorry, not the wrong screen, into the calendar module. And I'm just trying to move something out of the way here. Sorry, bear with me 2 seconds. Yeah, sorry, I actually have a very small calendar here, but Sandie went down through, and I think that was probably just a snapshot, Sandie, of some of the AML documentation that firms have. Like it's and I know the way you open up the webinar was kind of evidence and documentation is key to compliance, and I think that's led a lot of firms to have tens of documents and policies and procedures, particularly around such an area such as high risk as AML. So what I wanted to show here is the way we see firms solving it within the platform really is having an AML or a policy review schedule or calendar built into the solution. So you can see I have my AML policy due for review every May, but I have training that's due in June, in December. So maybe every 6 months my training happens. This will send out automatic email reminders. We can have this again as that source of truth where I can actually have my AML policy attached to that review that happened in May. I can add a documents button up here again. So that's really how straightforward the piece is in calQrisk. Assign the document owner, give it its frequency in which it needs to be reviewed, and then the system will pretty much do the rest of the work for you on top of having those detailed training logs and registers and stuff like that too. So I think back over to you, Sandie.
Just a quick question there from an attendee there, Chris, just to say we don't seem to have registers as a section on our platform. Is it something that needs to be added?
Oh yeah, if they want to email, is there an existing calQrisk user? Yeah, absolutely. If they email helpdesk@calqrisk.com, the team here will have a look at it.
Cool. So the next pillar, if you go down to the next slide there, Chris, please, thank you. Yeah, what we refer to in the Republic of Ireland as the AML business-wide risk assessment, but in different jurisdictions, it may be called the firm-wide risk assessment. Every jurisdiction has maybe slight variations between, but in general, it is having a business-wide risk assessment is good, is best practice, is best risk management practice. It goes into more granular detail than the original risk register that Chris illustrated at the beginning. That is needed for one aspect of risk management. The AML business-wide risk assessment is very much more specifically about getting into the granular detail of what the entity has in terms of its own arrangements on managing the associated risks. And it is distinct from that higher level risk area, that's reported to the board, but it's absolutely vital that it be completed at least on an annual basis. It gives a much clearer picture of how money laundering and terrorist financing risk is being managed on the ground also by product and through a number of different categories. The range of controls is dependent upon the business model of your own entity. It is very product and service specific, and it is highly customizable. The point here is that no one size fits all, and it's quite flexible in terms of the details that each entity is going to attach to the granular risks in this respect. I think one of the key challenges that entities found was that a lot of attention was being given to the money laundering side, and regulators in different jurisdictions found that the terrorist financing element wasn't getting as much attention. So what we tried to do was balance that out by creating this business-wide risk assessment tool. And hopefully that I suppose more balanced attention also demonstrates the good practices that you have in your own organization. I'll pass you over to Chris.
Yeah.
Perfect. Sorry, I was trying to find the mute button there. So Sandie, one of the questions I think you were asked was about the split between kind of the ERM or the enterprise-wide risk framework and maybe the AML or the BWRA. So one of the things we tend not to go into this in too much detail, but I suppose it's useful to point out here now is that I can have an instance of calQrisk that is for the ops risk framework or enterprise-wide risk framework, and then I can have a completely separate instance for BWRA. Part of the reason we do that is that Sandie mentioned the detail difference. You tend to be super granular down in the detail on the BWRA, but also I think one of the other questions that popped up as part of the STR process is the level of confidentiality that is usually associated with AML controls. And I appreciate I'm abbreviating AML to everything that Sandie alluded to at the very beginning, but yeah, so within the BWRA context is where we would allude to it in calQrisk. You can assign a subset of users. So not every user even knows it exists on the platform. And I had mentioned there was a couple of different ways within calQrisk of doing assessments. And earlier on at the higher level, at the ERM or ops risk level, I think I showed the questionnaire, if you like, whereas now I'm going to maybe drill down into another level of detail. So if I just come in and have a look at a risk around the source of funds, I'm not going to explain the inherent risk and pieces like this again, but just to touch on a couple of other fields that I maybe left off the last time. One of the things is that people will always link their BWRA back to jurisdictions or channels, geography, product, services. So you can have this split out whichever way suits yourself, basically. So the idea is that I can have it, if I think this is to do with channels, I can just simply change it. Really useful for the BWRA reporting, where we can have risk assessments that are aligned to the different sources of threat, basically, as well. The big differentiator here I wanted to show on the BWRA before we look at maybe the risk register, the report that we've generated for that, is the concept of having this different or detailed control library behind it. So I can see in this example, I have 22 different controls that are linked to that risk. If I come into link, you can obviously have your own full AML suite of controls built into the solution, or you can just take our framework or our piece out of the box. And what you can do then is if I come up here and just type in something like GEO, it'll help me filter out any of the controls that are specific to geographic or jurisdiction, for example. Likewise, if I was to use product or service, I could go in and filter out any of the risks, any of the controls that are useful for that. Simply just link the controls back by just ticking the box, click link, and then the solution will join the risk to the control then that way, basically. So really useful in that regard. We won't go down into the level of detail on the controls just yet, because I think, Sandy, you're going to cover a slide on the control testing piece shortly, I think. But there's a whole other level then, if you like, below the BWRA, that assessment at control level, which we'll touch on shortly as well. But I think maybe now I might just show a BWRA report, which I know a couple of our clients actively use. So I'm just going to navigate it to a slightly different way. So this is what we call our custom reporting. Again, you don't need to worry about columns, color codes. This is all bespoke to each individual firm. So what we're going to look at here on screen is while it's generating, if you don't agree that something over 12 is red, and maybe for your firm it's over 9 or something like that, that can all be captured in the solution as well. So you'll see there's a good bit more detail in the BWRA than the standard risk register we had a look at. So we've our inherent and residual risk. We can include target risk if we like, which I know is very popular at the minute. We've all our controls listed out along with our control ownership and control effectiveness. And if you want to add any extra columns, remove columns, color codes, as I mentioned, that's all possible within the solution as well. And then obviously that report can be exported. Like any of the reports we've had a look at so far, they can all be exported literally at the click of a button. If you needed to send it to a regulator or another stakeholder, for example, that can all be captured as well. But yeah, I think that was it on the BWRA. So maybe back over to you, Sandy, for, I think it's control testing, is it?
Yes, please. Yeah. So as we all know, you establish the level of risk, you analyze it based on, you conduct your risk assessment, and you make a judgment call on how good or bad or strong you feel that your risk exposure is. But it all comes down to testing at the end of the day. And you know, it's making sure you have a structure in place, and particularly in this context where we're talking about centralizing that information, first of all, knowing what it is that you want to monitor and check and control is a good starting point. So when we're looking at key risk indicators, when it comes to AML, CFT, and FS, what we want to be able to see is whether there are negative trends, which, you know, where things are going maybe in the wrong direction, or flagging something that we need to do, you know, give it more attention and so on. So what we like to be able to facilitate within the software is that monitoring piece. It's picking out key pieces of information to be able to make the decisions, you know, to inform the decisions that need to be made at various levels throughout your entity. And that would include things like tracking the number of STRs that are being submitted, being able to report on the number of notifiable STRs. So, you know, receiving them initially from the AML to the AML compliance officer, but then what proportion of those are requiring onward notification to the FIU or revenue authorities. So the number of applications, for example, that you might be getting from PEPs, it's not that the PEPs themselves, you know, the number of PEPs themselves is the issue. It's that you may have to be putting more resource into monitoring the activity on those accounts. It's making sure that, you know, where exceptions have to be made to your standard due diligence documentation requirements, for example, for the reasons of financial inclusion, and, you know, where those exceptions are made, that it's identified and tracked. And if you're finding that you're having to make more exceptions, you might need to be reviewing your due diligence documentation, identifying why these trends are occurring. But the first part is knowing that that trend is occurring. Being aware of whether you're experiencing more or less challenges in terms of confirming beneficial ownership, for example, being able to track unusual account activity, being able to report on it. Transactions to high-risk jurisdictions, again, is another indicator, you know, where more attention and resource might need to be allocated. Knowing what the number of financial sanctions hits are. So again, all of these types of things do need to be built into a centralized system so that you can actually see these trends emerging. And Chris will have a look at that for us now.
Good. Right, so Sandie mentioned about the key risk indicators, and basically they can be tracked independently within the system, or they can be linked back to risks, they can be linked back to controls, or whichever way you want. So I thought it'd be useful just to come in and have a look at the next level down under the BWRA, with a view of then eventually looking at that control testing piece then as well. So I'm in what we call our controls library or user controls. And you can see, again, don't worry too much about the data points captured. It's all configurable about what's in these drop downs. But you can see I have a control, the effectiveness, the ownership, the type, the next review date, when it was last updated. I can have my audit trail all in here as well. I have that row buttons up the top for my documentation evidence. I can see this must be a key control in my firm because it it mitigates 20 risks. I don't have any tasks around improvement plans or anything like that too. But if I scroll just slightly down and appreciate I only have just one question in here, the idea then is you can have multiple KRIs, KPIs, or just control test plans linked to a control within the solution. You'll be able to see who owns the KPI or the KRI. You'll be able to see how frequently they need to answer it, and then what it's tagged back to as well. So in this case, I have an AML control, and then every 12 months I get asked, have all new joiners reviewed and understood the AML policy? In reality, in a large firm, that should probably be being asked every 3 months if you're in a recruitment cycle, for example. So yeah, you can capture all your KRIs, KPIs, link them to the relevant records in the solution. And then, as you said, Sandie alluded to, you can use the reporting then as well to track any negative trends or hopefully see the negative trend before it gets too far down the line. So back over to you, Sandie.
Okay, so I just missed a question there. Gone outside of my screen that was visible. Just to go back to the STRs piece, there was a question to say if you need to complete a second or third STR on a member, can that be captured in the same location?
Yes, yeah, that can all be built into the same form. Yeah, you can actually, what you can do is you can link records together, if that makes sense. So in theory, they'll actually be 3 separate STRs, but then you can actually join the 3 of them up, if that makes sense. So there'll be a tie between the 3 of them. Say, look, in the last 7 days, we've had 3 STRs from this member, customer, whatever it might be. Absolutely, that's possible.
Okay. And this is more of a general question, and it could do it at the end of it, but anyway, I may as well mention it. Hi, there seems to be a lot more functionality and information in the controls database on the platform that I wasn't aware that there was. Is there a document or information document that sets out what default or out-of-the-box information is available to access?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as an existing calQrisk user, just pop an email over to the help desk, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
And I guess that's what part of the reason why we're doing today's session. You know, a lot of this functionality has evolved over time. And, you know, while this information goes out in the regular newsletters from the customer support side of things, sometimes it kind of creeps up on people and they suddenly realize, oh my God, there's all that functionality I wasn't even aware of and didn't know existed. So that's part of the driver behind having one of these sessions. Okay, so the last part that we're going to have a quick look at is the regulatory reporting requirements. As you know, we're going to have a look at an example that we have, I suppose, experienced for a lot of our customers in the last few months. But it's just to illustrate the type of thing that we do. If there are other reporting requirements that can be built into the system, we'll obviously, depending on your own jurisdictions, for the people that are attending today, we can have a look at it and see if there's something equivalent that we can help you with. But we're going to use the anti-money laundering risk evaluation questionnaire for Republic of Ireland financial services sector as an example. This because it's an ongoing annual requirement. Key to this is that the data originates from multiple sources. It doesn't all come from one risk owner, if you like, within the entity. You're gathering data from a range of sources within the entity and pulling it all together in order to submit a regulatory report. A lot of the data, the format in which the information is requested, comes as a standard form, but there are different forms depending on the industry sector that you might be operating in. But even within each individual industry, some data fields are applicable and others not, depending on your own business model, what products and services you offer. In this particular example, one of the key elements is that there's a mandatory file format required for submission, which is XML in this particular case, and the submissions to the central bank portal come with associated validations. So, you know, the point of today's of using this to illustrate is really just to illustrate that where there are regulatory reporting requirements, if it is something that can be collated and gathered and submitted more easily through calQrisk, then it makes sense to do it that way. So Chris is going to give you a demonstration of what we've done on that in the last few months.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think Sandie mentioned to it as well, this won't be applicable for everybody on the call, but for those of you who are maybe in different jurisdictions and not in the Republic of Ireland, for example. There's lots of other kind of regulatory reports built into the solution. And if there are ones that are particular pain points, do please let us know as well. So we're going to focus on, as Andy mentioned, the risk evaluation questionnaire. There are different types available out of the box within the solution. So you have your crypto company, a credit institution, a credit union, an investment firm, life, or PMI. There's lots of different templates basically that the regulator has published depending on what you're regulated as. And really what we built within the solution is, rather than having to do it on an Excel doc or a template that the regulator has provided, there's a lot of data validation required, and in general a lot of data required as well. Unfortunately, to try and convert that XLS or that Excel document into an XML file that you can actually then go and send to the regulatory authority or submit through a portal. So what we've actually done within the solution is basically built out the form, built all of the data validation and everything else in the solution. So where it needs date fields, it has a date picker there for you. It has information about your business-wide risk assessment, which will live within calQrisk, your onboarding and offboarding controls, policy and procedure reviews. But ultimately, where we kind of save a lot of the time is up here on this download XML. So the solution would actually give you the final package in which you can go and upload to the regulator. So for those of you who probably went through like the Digital Operation Resilience Act or the Register of Information, you'll know how painful some of those submissions are. For those of you regulated by the UK, or sorry, by the FCA or the PRA, I think there's material third party and enhanced incident reporting coming next March. Again, there'll be very specific registers and formats and data validation. So we continue to build those out within the solution such that it becomes just push a button, get my report and get it over to the relevant authority. So I'm not going to go down through each field on this because there's hundreds of fields, I think, in these forms. So there's 676 in this one I'm in. I know one of the REQs has like 900 data points to fill in, I think. So I think it'd be a poor use of everyone's time for me to go down through that. But I think that might be it, Sandy. And I kind of might be up on time as well. But any questions that we skipped or anything that we went through quick? Or Sandy, back to you.
Yeah, I've just been keeping an eye on the Q&A piece, but there's nothing additional than the ones we've, I think we've covered everything that was asked, but please feel free to throw in another question if anything occurs just now. And if it doesn't, obviously, please reach out. You'll see on the very last slide, we've included our email addresses. So if something occurs separately after today, and maybe even when you get the slides or it's made available to you, please do reach out. And if there's anything more we can help with, as Chris mentioned earlier, if it's a question on the functionality and you're already a calQrisk customer, then please reach out to customer support on the help desk. They'd be more than willing to give you an idea of what is available in your own database and setup. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Chris? There's no more questions coming in that I can see.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. Just thanks again to everybody for the time. And yeah, the slides and everything else will be with you shortly.